The courthouse steps were slick with morning dew when Joanna Bell arrived, her two boys trailing behind like reluctant shadows. The October air bit through her threadbare coat, but she kept her chin level, ignoring the whispers that followed her path through the gathering crowd. "That's the widow Bell," someone muttered. "Lost her husband to fever last spring. Heard she can barely keep that patch of dirt they call a ranch," another voice added. Joanna's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Samuel, her 9-year-old, pressed closer to her side, his small hand finding hers. Amos, 2 years younger, peered around her skirts at the spectacle forming on the courthouse platform. Judge Cornelius Pike stood at the center of it all, his black robes billowing in the wind like crow's wings. He was a man who enjoyed his authority the way some men enjoyed whiskey, too much and too often. Beside him, Sheriff Coleman shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his pistol as 3 men were led onto the platform in chains. "Ladies and gentlemen of Cedar Ridge," Judge Pike's voice boomed across the square, silencing the crowd. "We gather today for an unusual proceeding." The judge's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile on a kinder face. On his it looked like a knife slash. "These 3 men stand convicted of various crimes against our fair community. Normally, they'd be bound for the territorial prison. However," he paused, savoring the moment, "our esteemed mayor has proposed an alternative solution to ease the burden on our taxpayers." Mayor Aldrich, a portly man in a too-tight vest, nodded from his position near the platform. His idea, Joanna had heard, though she doubted he'd thought of much beyond his next meal. "Each of these men," Judge Pike continued, "has agreed to an arrangement. Any widow in need of a husband may claim one of them today. In exchange for marriage and honest work, they'll receive a commuted sentence." The crowd stirred, voices rising in a mix of shock and amusement. Some of the men guffawed openly. A few women near Joanna clicked their tongues in disapproval. "Think of it," the judge's voice rose above the noise, "as the territory's gift to our struggling widows. Pick any husband for free." Laughter rippled through the assembly. Joanna felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her eyes fixed on the platform. She hadn't come here to be mocked. She'd come because winter was approaching, the ranch was failing, and her boys needed more than she could give them alone. "Let's present our candidates," Judge Pike announced with theatrical flair. The first man stepped forward, or rather, was pushed by the sheriff. Tom Bull McKenna. Joanna recognized him from the saloons. Broad-shouldered and thick-necked, he grinned at the crowd with the confidence of a man who'd never met a fight he didn't think he could win. "McKenna here," the judge read from a paper. "Convicted of brawling, destruction of property, and public intoxication. Multiple offenses." Bull flexed his arms, making the chains rattle. "Any lady looking for protection won't find better," he called out, winking at a cluster of younger women who giggled nervously. The second man needed no introduction. Eugene Whitmore's golden hair caught the morning sun, and despite his chains, he maintained the bearing of a gentleman. His clothes, though dusty, spoke of money, or at least the memory of it. "Mr. Whitmore." Judge Pike's tone grew sardonic. "Found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and false representation. Quite the silver tongue on this one. Ladies." Eugene bowed as much as his restraints allowed. "I assure you all, those charges were vastly exaggerated. A simple misunderstanding between business partners." His smile was practiced, smooth as oil on water. The third man hadn't moved. He stood at the edge of the platform. His face turned slightly away from the crowd. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his clothes, simple work clothes, bore the wear of hard use. When the sheriff prodded him forward, he moved with reluctant steps. "Weston Cross," the judge announced, consulting his paper with a frown. "Horse theft." That was all. No elaboration, no theatrics. Weston kept his eyes down, his shoulders set in a line that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, unlike the others. He made no attempt to appeal to the crowd. "Well then," Judge Pike clasped his hands together, "are there any takers? Remember, ladies, this offer won't last forever." The square fell silent. The women who'd been giggling moments before now looked away. The reality of the situation, taking a criminal for a husband, seemed to settle over them like a cold blanket. Joanna studied each man carefully. Bull McKenna would drink away anything he earned and probably raise his fists when the liquor ran out. She'd seen his type before. Eugene Whitmore would sweet-talk her out of what little she had left, then disappear one night with the cash box. His kind left a trail of broken promises across the frontier. But the third man, Weston Cross, stood apart, not just physically but in bearing. While the others performed for the crowd, he simply existed, enduring the spectacle with quiet dignity. His hands, she noticed, were calloused from work, not from holding cards or bottles. "Come now." Judge Pike's voice took on a mocking edge. "Surely someone needs help with the coming harvest? These men are offering free labor, ladies, free protection, free companionship." More laughter from the men in the crowd. Samuel's hand tightened in Joanna's grip. "Mama," Amos whispered. "Why are those men wearing chains?" "Hush," she said softly, but her mind was made up. Joanna Bell stepped forward. The crowd parted, surprise rippling through them like wind through wheat. She walked steadily, her worn boots clicking on the cobblestones. Behind her, she heard Samuel's sharp intake of breath, but he followed, loyal as always, pulling Amos along. Well, Judge Pike's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Bell, come to survey the merchandise?" "I've come to accept your offer," she said, her voice carrying clear across the square. "Excellent." The judge rubbed his hands together. "And which of these fine specimens will you have? The fighter? The charmer?" Joanna turned to face the three men. Bull McKenna puffed out his chest and winked at her. Eugene Whitmore straightened his collar and offered his most winning smile. Weston Cross finally looked up. His eyes were gray as a winter sky, weary but alert. For a moment, their gazes met. She saw no promise there, no plea, just a man waiting for whatever came next. But in that waiting, she sensed something else, a steadiness, like bedrock beneath shifting sand. "I'll take him," Joanna said, pointing to Weston. "Mr. Cross." The square erupted. Laughter, gasps, exclamations of disbelief. Judge Pike's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "The horse thief?" he finally managed. "Madam, surely you just... Why not choose someone more suitable?" "You said any husband for free," Joanna replied evenly. "I've made my choice." Bull McKenna spat on the platform. "Your loss, lady. Could have had a real man." Eugene Whitmore shook his head with practiced regret. "I do hope you won't regret this decision, ma'am." Weston Cross said nothing. He studied her with those gray eyes, seeming to take her measure just as she'd taken his. Then, surprisingly, he nodded once, a small gesture, but somehow it felt like an agreement between them. "Very well." Judge Pike recovered his composure, though his amusement had soured. "Sheriff, prepare the paperwork. It seems Mrs. Bell has chosen her new husband." He pronounced the last word like it tasted bad. As the sheriff led Weston down from the platform, the crowd began to disperse. Their entertainment concluded. Joanna heard the comments as she passed. Lost her mind with grief, most likely. Those boys'll have a convict for a father now. Mark my words, she'll regret this before winter's out. But Joanna Bell had survived drought, fever, and the death of a husband who'd been more burden than help in his final years. She'd kept her sons fed and her land barely in her own hands. If she could do all that, she could handle whatever came with Weston Cross. At the courthouse door, Sheriff Coleman paused. "You sure about this, Mrs. Bell? Once these papers are signed." "I'm sure," she said behind her. Young Amos tugged on her skirt. "Mama, is that man coming home with us?" "Yes," she said quietly, watching as Weston Cross was led inside, his chains clanking with each step. "He is," Samuel, older and warier, whispered. "What if he's dangerous?" Joanna looked down at her eldest son, seeing too much of herself in his worried eyes. "Then we'll be careful," she said. "But sometimes, Samuel, we have to take chances. Otherwise, we're just waiting to fail." As they entered the courthouse, leaving the mocking crowd behind, Joanna allowed herself one moment of doubt. Then she pushed it aside. She'd made her choice, for better or worse. Now came the hard part, living with it. The courthouse holding room smelled of sweat and stale tobacco. Sheriff Coleman unlocked Weston's shackles, the iron falling away with a sound that echoed off the stone walls. Weston rubbed his wrists slowly, his gray eyes never leaving Joanna's face. "You can speak freely now," the sheriff said, backing toward the door. "I'll give you folks a few minutes before we handle the paperwork." When the door closed behind him, silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Samuel and Amos pressed close to their mother, watching the stranger who would become their stepfather. Weston spoke first, his voice rough from disuse. Why? It was a simple question that held a dozen others inside it. Joanna appreciated the directness. "I need help," she said plainly. "My ranch is failing. Winter's coming. I've got 2 boys to feed and 20 head of cattle that won't survive without hay I can't afford to buy." "So you picked a horse thief?" "I picked a man who knows how to work." She gestured at his calloused hands. "Those didn't come from playing cards." A ghost of something, perhaps surprise, crossed his weathered features. "You don't know anything about me. I know you didn't grandstand on that platform like the others. I know you're not drunk at 10 in the morning. And I know you're here talking instead of making promises you won't keep." Weston studied her for a long moment, then shifted his attention to the boys. Samuel met his gaze steadily. Chin jutted out in defiance. Amos peeked out from behind his mother's skirts. "What are your names?" Weston asked. "I'm Samuel," the older boy said, adding firmly, "And you're not our PA." "Didn't say I was." "This is Amos," Joanna said, resting a hand on her younger son's head. "He's shy with strangers." "Smart boy." Weston returned his attention to her. "What exactly are you expecting from this arrangement?" Joanna had thought about this on the walk to town, rehearsing the words while her boots kicked up dust on the dry road. "I need someone who'll work the ranch, fix what's broken, help bring in what harvest there is, keep the cattle alive through winter. In exchange, you get a roof over your head, 3 meals a day, and freedom from prison. That's all." She understood what he was asking. "I'm not looking for a husband in anything but name, Mr. Cross. I buried one man already. I'm not keen to—" She glanced at her sons. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or understanding. "And if I agree to these terms, then we live by them. You work, I provide. You stay away from the bottle and keep your hands to yourself. You give me cause to fear for my boys or myself, and I'll put a bullet in you myself. The sheriff's my second cousin. He won't ask questions." Weston's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Fair enough. What about my past? Were you guilty?" He held her gaze steadily. "No. Then it doesn't matter." "Simple as that?" "Nothing simple, Mr. Cross. But I can't afford to be complicated right now." She paused, then asked the question that mattered most. "Will you keep your word if you give it?" "Yes." No elaboration. No justification. Just that single word, spoken with quiet certainty. It was enough. "Then we have an agreement." Joanna extended her hand. Weston looked at it for a moment, as if he'd forgotten such gestures existed. Then he took it, his grip firm but careful. His hand was warm, rough with calluses that matched her own. "I should tell you," he said, not releasing her hand immediately. "I'm not good with people. Been on my own a long time. I'm not hiring you to be sociable." This time, the smile did break through, just a slight upturn at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his face for an instant. "No, ma'am, I suppose you're not." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Coleman entered with a thin man in spectacles, the courthouse clerk. "Ready to make this official?" the sheriff asked, looking between them with barely concealed curiosity. The clerk spread papers on the small table. "This is highly irregular," he muttered, adjusting his glasses. Marriage contracts are typically more celebratory affairs. Nothing typical about this, Weston said dryly. As they signed the documents, Joanna's hand steady. Weston's hesitant over the unfamiliar papers. She noticed he could read and write. Another surprise. Many men in the territory couldn't. There, the clerk said when the last signature was complete. In the eyes of the law, you are now man and wife. May God have mercy on your souls. Sheriff Coleman removed the shackles fully and handed Weston a small bundle, his personal effects from when he was arrested. You're a free man now. Cross, conditionally. This marriage is your parole. You run out on Mrs. Bell, and I'll hunt you down myself. Understood? Joanna. The sheriff turned to her, his professional demeanor slipping. You sure about this? It's not too late to... It's done. Thomas, she said firmly. Thank you for your concern. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. The crowd had dispersed, leaving only a few curious stragglers who watched them descend the steps. Weston walked slightly apart from them, as if unsure of his place in this strange new family unit. Where's your wagon? He asked. Don't have one. We walked. His eyebrows rose. How far? 8 miles, give or take. He looked at the boys, particularly Amos, whose face was already flushed with heat. Without a word, Weston knelt down. You tired, boy? Amos nodded shyly. Want a ride? The 7-year-old looked at his mother, who gave a small nod. Slowly, Amos approached. Weston lifted him onto his shoulders with practiced ease, as if he'd done it before. He's high up, Amos exclaimed, delighted despite his earlier wariness. They set off down the dusty main street. An odd procession, a woman in a patched dress, a suspicious 9-year-old, a convicted horse thief carrying a child he just met. People stared from shop windows and doorways. Joanna kept her head high, ignoring them all. At the general store, she stopped. I need to pick up supplies. With what money? Samuel asked, then caught himself. Sorry, Mama? It's all right. She turned to Weston. Wait here. Inside, Mr. Garrett, the shopkeeper, greeted her with surprise. Mrs. Bell, heard about your situation. That was quite a scene this morning. I need credit extended through winter, she said without preamble. I'll have help now. We can bring in the harvest, sell some cattle come spring. Garrett's face went through several expressions before settling on embarrassment. I'm sorry, Joanna, I truly am. But with things as they are, taking on a criminal husband doesn't exactly improve your creditworthiness. Heat flooded her cheeks. I see. It's nothing personal. Business is business. She left without another word. Outside, Weston took one look at her face and understood. No credit? No credit. He was quiet for a moment, then reached into the bundle Sheriff Coleman had returned to him. He pulled out a small leather pouch and handed it to her. What's this? Open it. Inside were coins, not many, but more than she'd seen in months. Where did you get this? Saved wages from before. They arrested me with it. Had to give it back. He shrugged. It's yours now. I can't. We have an agreement, don't we? I work, you provide. Can't work on an empty stomach. She looked at him. Really looked. Beneath the stubble and the weariness, she saw something she hadn't expected. Dignity. A man who'd kept his savings even when it might have bought him comfort in jail, who now handed it over without ceremony to a woman who'd chosen him out of desperation. Thank you, she said quietly. They bought basic supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, a bit of salt pork. Garrett took the money reluctantly, as if it might be tainted. When they emerged, Amos was still on Weston's shoulders, now chattering about the birds he could see from his new height. You don't have to carry him, Joanna said. He can walk. I don't mind. Weston adjusted the boy's weight. Been a while since I... He didn't finish the thought. The walk home was long and hot. Samuel trudged beside his mother, shooting occasional glances at Weston. About halfway, the boy finally spoke. "Why'd they say you stole horses?" "Samuel," Joanna warned. "It's all right," Weston said. "Boy has a right to know who's living in his house." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "Man I worked for claimed I took 2 of his horses. I didn't." "Then why'd they arrest you?" "His word against mine. He had friends. I didn't." "That's not fair." Amos piped up from his perch. "No," Weston agreed. "It's not." They walked on in silence until the ranch came into view. Joanna watched Weston's face as he took in the sagging fence, the patched roof, the meager garden struggling against drought. "It's not much," she said, defensive despite herself. "It's standing," he replied. "That's something." "Barely." He set Amos down gently and surveyed the property with a practical eye. "Fence needs work first. Can't keep cattle in if they can walk through the gaps. Roof before winter. That well pump working. Sometimes. I'll look at it." He turned to her. "Where do I sleep?" She'd thought about this too. "There's a lean-to off the barn. It's rough, but it's shelter. I'll get you blankets." He nodded, showing no disappointment. "I'll start on the fence tomorrow. Tonight. I'll check what tools you have. See what's needed." "You don't have to start immediately. You must be tired." "Ma'am." He interrupted gently. "I've been sitting in a cell for 3 months. Work sounds good right about now." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Joanna watched this stranger, her husband now, in law if nothing else, walk toward the barn with Samuel trailing behind, peppering him with questions about horses and fences and tools. Amos tugged on her skirt. "Mama, I like him. He's tall." "Yes," she said absently. "He is." But height wasn't what had made her choose him. It was the way he'd stood apart on that platform, refusing to perform. The way he'd handed over his savings without hesitation. The way he'd lifted Amos onto his shoulders as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She'd made her choice based on instinct and desperation. Now, as she watched Weston cross-examine their broken-down ranch with the eye of a man who saw work to be done rather than failure to escape, she allowed herself the smallest spark of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The first week passed in a blur of mending and making do. Weston rose before dawn each day, the creak of the barn door announcing his presence before the rooster even thought to crow. By the time Joanna had breakfast ready, he'd already fed the chickens, checked the cattle, and started whatever repair he deemed most urgent. The fence came first. Joanna watched from the kitchen window as he worked, methodical and steady, replacing rotted posts and restringing wire. Samuel shadowed him constantly, handing him tools and asking endless questions. To her surprise, Weston answered each one patiently, showing the boy how to test if a post was solid, how to stretch wire without it snapping back. "See how this one's soft at the base?" she heard him tell Samuel one morning. "Rot travels up from the ground. Always check low first." "Pa never taught me that," Samuel said, then caught himself. "I mean, my real PA. Every man has his own way of doing things." Weston replied simply and went back to work. The lean-to where Weston slept was little more than a shed, but he'd made no complaint. Joanna had provided 2 thick blankets and a straw mattress that had seen better days. Once, bringing him coffee. She'd glimpsed inside. He'd arranged his few possessions with military precision, the space clean as a whistle despite the dirt floor. On the 8th day, Amos presented Weston with a gift at breakfast. "I made this for you," the boy said shyly, producing a crumpled piece of paper. Weston set down his coffee and took the drawing carefully, as if it were made of gold. On the paper, stick figures stood before a crooked house, a woman, 2 boys, and a tall man. "That's all of us," Amos explained, pointing. "See? You're the tall one. I see that." Weston studied the drawing with grave attention. "This is fine work. You can keep it," Amos offered magnanimously. "Thank you." Weston folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I'll take good care of it." Joanna caught something flicker across his face, a shadow of old pain, perhaps, or memory, but it was gone before she could be sure. The ranch revealed its problems like layers of an onion. The well pump needed new leather washers. The chicken coop had gaps large enough for foxes to squeeze through. The barn roof leaked in 3 places, but worst was the equipment, or lack of it. Plows rusted through, Weston reported one evening. Harnesses more patches than leather. And that wagon, he shook his head. We make do, Joanna said defensively, not criticizing, just taking stock. He leaned against the porch post, careful to maintain distance between them. Your husband, how long was he sick? 2 years, off and on. The last 6 months. She trailed off. No need to explain how Frank had wasted away while the ranch fell apart around them, how she'd spent more time nursing than farming. Takes its toll, Weston said quietly. On everything? She appreciated that he didn't offer empty sympathy or platitudes, just acknowledgement of hard truth. The days settled into rhythm. Weston worked. Samuel helped and learned. Amos followed them both like a devoted puppy, and Joanna found herself sleeping better than she had in months, knowing someone else was watching, working, caring about whether the fence held or the roof leaked. It was the small things she noticed, how Weston always knocked before entering the house, even for meals, how he ate whatever she put before him without complaint, always thanking her after, how he'd carved a toy horse for Amos from a piece of scrap wood, spending evenings whittling it smooth while the boy watched in fascination. You have children? She asked one night, surprising herself with the question. His hand stilled on the wooden horse. Had boy and a girl. The past tense hung heavy between them. Joanna knew better than to push. In the West, everyone had graves behind them. They would have liked this place, he said finally. All this sky. 2 weeks into their arrangement, trouble arrived in the form of Travis Gentry. Joanna was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. 3 riders crested the hill, Gentry in the lead on his big bay stallion. Her hands tightened on the wet sheet. Mrs. Bell. Gentry touched his hat brim in mock courtesy. Or should I say, Mrs. Cross now. Mr. Gentry. She kept her voice level. What brings you out here? Just checking on my investment. He dismounted, his men remaining on their horses. Wanted to see this convict husband of yours. He's working. I'm sure he is. Gentry's smile was all teeth, no warmth. Must be quite a change, having a man around again, even if he is a horse thief. What do you want? Direct. I like that. He pulled a paper from his coat. Your note's coming due. 2 months. Thought I'd remind you personally. I haven't forgotten. Good. Because I'd hate to have to foreclose on a widow. Again. His eyes traveled over the ranch. Possessive already. Though I must say, this land would round out my holdings nicely. Weston appeared from behind the barn, carrying a post-hole digger. He took in the scene, Gentry, the mounted men, Joanna's rigid posture, and altered his path to approach them. Mr. Gentry, Joanna said stiffly. This is my husband, Weston Cross. Gentry looked Weston up and down like a man appraising livestock. The horse thief. Heard about Judge Pike's little spectacle. Must be desperate times when a woman chooses a criminal for a husband. Weston said nothing, just stood there with the tool in his hand, waiting. Not much of a talker. Are you? Gentry prodded. Suppose that's what comes from living in a cage. Man only needs to talk when he's got something worth saying. Weston replied evenly. Gentry's smile faltered slightly. Well, just remember, Cross, you're here on sufferance. The town's watching. One wrong step. He drew a finger across his throat. We appreciate the reminder. Joanna interjected. Now, if you've delivered your message... Of course. Gentry remounted his horse. 2 months. Mrs. Cross, have my money ready? He looked at Weston once more. Or start packing. They watched the riders disappear over the hill. Joanna realized she was trembling, anger and fear warring in her chest. "How much?" Weston asked. $300? He whistled low. "Steep. Frank was sick. We needed medicine. Doctors. Gentry was the only one who'd lend." She laughed bitterly. "He's been circling like a vulture ever since. He wants the land." "Yes." Weston surveyed the property with new eyes. "Water rights. Creek access. Year-round." She saw he understood. In dry country, water meant everything. No wonder. He hefted the post-hole digger. "Better get back to work." "That's all. Just back to work." He paused. "You want me to ride after him? Challenge him to a shootout? That what you think I am?" "No, I just—" She wasn't sure what she wanted. Someone to rage with her. Maybe. To acknowledge the unfairness of it all. "Ma'am," Weston said quietly, "I've learned that getting angry at men like Gentry is like howling at the moon. Doesn't change anything. Work might." That night, she found him in the barn, sketching something on a piece of brown paper by lantern light. "What's that?" "Irrigation ditches." He showed her the crude map. "If we can channel some of the creek water to the lower pasture, might grow enough hay to sell come spring. Help with that debt." Frank tried that. Couldn't manage it alone. He didn't have help. Weston studied the drawing. "Ground's hard, but not impossible. Samuel's old enough to help. Even Amos can carry stones." "You do all that? For a place that might not be ours in 2 months?" He looked up at her then, and in the lantern light, his gray eyes seemed almost warm. "Made an agreement, didn't we? I work, you provide, didn't put a time limit on it. But if Gentry forecloses, then we'll deal with that when it comes. Right now. We've got 2 months. Lot can happen in 2 months." She wanted to argue, to point out the futility of it all, but something in his quiet certainty stopped her. This was a man who'd been condemned, chained, offered up for mockery, and he was planning irrigation ditches. "All right," she said. "We'll try." As she turned to go, he called after her, "Mrs. Cross." She paused. It was the first time he'd used her married name. "That's good land out there, worth fighting for." "Is it?" She was too tired to keep the despair from her voice. "Sometimes I think it would be easier to just give up, take the boys somewhere else, start over." "Could do that," he agreed. "But seems to me you're not the giving up type, else you wouldn't have walked into that courthouse and chosen a horse thief for a husband." Despite everything, she felt her lips twitch toward a smile. That was desperation, not courage. Sometimes they look the same. Back in the house, she checked on the boys. Samuel was reading by candlelight, struggling through a book of adventure stories. Amos was already asleep, clutching the wooden horse Weston had carved. Through the window, she could see light still burning in the barn, planning, working, fighting in his own quiet way. She'd chosen him for his hands, working hands, not drinking hands, not hitting hands. But she was beginning to see she'd gotten more than that. A man who answered a boy's endless questions, who accepted a child's drawing like a treasure, who looked at their failing ranch and saw not defeat, but possibility. 2 months. It wasn't long. But as Joanna prepared for bed, she thought about Weston's words. A lot could happen in 2 months. Maybe even hope could grow roots in ground that seemed too hard to yield anything but dust. Travis Gentry's shadow fell across their lives like a bank of storm clouds. He found excuses to ride by the ranch twice a week, always with his men, always watching. Sometimes he'd stop at the property line, making a show of checking his pocket watch, counting down the days. 53 days left, Mrs. Cross, he called out one morning while Joanna was feeding the chickens. "Hope you're making arrangements." She didn't respond, just scattered the feed with sharp, angry movements. But her hands shook after he rode away. The pressure manifested in other ways. At the general store, Mr. Garrett suddenly remembered a small debt Frank had left. At the church social, women who'd been cordial before now whispered behind their fans when she passed. Even the school teacher suggested that perhaps Samuel and Amos would be more comfortable learning at home. "It's Gentry," Weston said when she told him. "He's squeezing." How do you know? Seen it before. Man like that doesn't just wait. He tilts the table. They were sitting on the porch after supper, the boys inside doing their letters. It had become their evening ritual, this quiet hour when the work was done but sleep hadn't yet claimed them. "I won't let him have this land," Joanna said fiercely. "Frank might have given up, but I won't." "Your husband gave up?" She hesitated. They'd not spoken much of Frank. He was a dreamer, always had big plans, never could make them real. When he got sick, it was almost a relief to him. An excuse to stop trying. Hard on you. Hard on the boys. They needed a father who'd fight for them. She glanced at him. "I suppose that's why I chose you. You look like a fighter." "Did I?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "Most days I feel like I'm just trying to stay standing. Maybe that's what fighting is." The next morning brought new trouble. Weston had taken Samuel to check the cattle in the far pasture when they discovered the fence cut and 5 head missing. Clean cut. Weston showed her the wire. Not broken. Someone did this. Gentry. Or his men. No way to prove it. Samuel was furious. "We should tell the sheriff. Get a posse." "And say what?" Weston asked gently. "That we think Gentry stole them but can't prove it? Who's going to believe us over him? It's not fair." "No," Weston agreed. "It's not." That night, Joanna found Weston cleaning his rifle in the barn. She'd never seen him with a weapon before. "You planning to use that?" "Planning to be ready if I need to." He ran an oiled cloth along the barrel. "Man protects what's his. This isn't your fight." He looked up at her. "Isn't it?" The question hung between them. In the weeks since their strange marriage began, lines had blurred. He was hired help, but he ate at their table. A stranger, but Amos fell asleep on his shoulder during evening stories. Her husband in name only. But lately she'd caught herself watching him work, noticing the careful way he moved, the gentle patience with her boys. "I won't have bloodshed," she said finally. "Neither will I, if I can help it, but Gentry's escalating. Cut fences today. What tomorrow?" His words proved prophetic. 3 nights later, Joanna woke to the smell of smoke. "Fire!" Weston's voice boomed from outside. "The hay barn!" She flew from bed, grabbing her coat and boots. Outside, orange flames licked at the small structure where they stored winter feed. Weston was already hauling buckets from the well, Samuel beside him. "Take Amos to the house," Weston ordered when he saw her. "Keep him safe." "I can help. Please." The single word, urgent but not harsh, stopped her argument. They fought the fire for an hour, forming a bucket line from the well. By the time the flames died, the barn was gone, along with their precious hay stores. They stood in the smoke and ash, faces blackened, staring at the ruin. "How?" Samuel asked, voice thick with tears he wouldn't shed. Weston picked up something from the ground, a kerosene can, store-bought and new. This wasn't an accident. The next morning, Sheriff Coleman rode out to investigate. He was a decent man, Joanna's second cousin, but his hands were tied. "Can't prove it was Gentry," he said apologetically. "Could have been drifters, anyone." "Tom, you know it was him," Joanna pressed. "Knowing and proving are different things. Besides," he hesitated. "What?" "Gentry's got friends, important ones. Even if I could prove it, might not matter." After he left, Weston found Joanna crying behind the chicken coop, where the boys couldn't see. "We can't win," she said bitterly. "He has the money, the men, the influence. What do we have?" "Each other." She laughed, sharp and broken. "That's not enough." "Maybe not." He handed her his handkerchief. "But it's something." That evening, Gentry himself appeared. This time, he came alone, riding up bold as brass while they were eating supper. "Heard you had some trouble," he said when Weston answered the door. "Terrible thing. Fires. So hard to control out here." Weston said nothing, just stood in the doorway, blocking entry. "I've come with an offer," Gentry continued. "A generous one, considering I'll forgive the debt. Give Mrs. Cross and the boys safe passage to wherever they want to go. And a little traveling money besides. All she has to do is sign over the deed. No. Joanna appeared beside Weston. This is our home. Your home. Gentry's friendly mask slipped. Woman, you're 2 months from losing it anyway. I'm offering mercy. You're offering theft. His face darkened. Careful. Wouldn't want any more accidents. Weston moved then, stepping onto the porch, forcing Gentry to step back. You threatening this family? Just observing. Dangerous country. All sorts of things can happen. Fires. Missing cattle. Why? Even people can disappear. Is that so? Something in Weston's voice made Gentry's hand drift toward his pistol, but Weston's hands remained at his sides, empty but ready. You're a convict, cross, a nobody. Don't forget that. I'm not forgetting anything, Weston said quietly, including this visit. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Gentry turned on his heel and stalked to his horse. 44 days, he called as he mounted. Tick-tock. After he was gone, Joanna sank into a chair. He'll destroy us. Maybe. How can you be so calm? Weston sat across from her, something she'd rarely seen him do. Usually, he maintained careful distance. Because I've been destroyed before, survived it. You survive by doing the next thing that needs doing. Then the next, then the next. What's the next thing? We finish supper, help the boys with their letters, go to bed, wake up tomorrow and work. That's all? That's everything. He stood to go, then paused. Your cousin, the sheriff, he's sympathetic? Tom's a good man, but invite him for Sunday dinner. His wife, too, if he has one. Why? Witnesses. Gentry shows up while the sheriff's here, might think twice. It was the first time Weston had suggested any kind of social interaction. Joanna studied him, seeing new angles to this quiet man. All right, Sunday dinner. As he headed for the door, Amos ran to him. Arms outstretched, Weston caught him, lifting him easily. Don't let the bad man take our house, Amos said, small arms tight around Weston's neck. I won't. Promise? Weston met Joanna's eyes over the boy's head. I promise. It was a promise he couldn't possibly keep, not against Gentry's power and money, but looking at him holding her son, seeing the determination settle over his features like armor. Joanna almost believed he could. That night, she heard him working in the barn late into the night, planning something, building something, fighting in his steady, quiet way. She pulled her shawl tight and stepped onto the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, indifferent to human struggles. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. The sound used to frighten her. Now it just seemed like part of the landscape, like drought and wind and men like Travis Gentry. But so was the man in her barn, the one who'd promised a 7-year-old boy the impossible, the one who'd stood between her and Gentry without raising a hand but ready to if needed. Her husband. The word still felt strange, but less so each day. 44 days. Not long. But Weston was right. All they could do was the next thing, then the next. And tomorrow, she'd invite Tom and his wife for Sunday dinner. It was a small thing, but small things added up. Sometimes they even added up to hope. Winter arrived early that year, bringing snow that dusted the mountains like flour on a kitchen table. The days grew shorter, the work harder. But something had shifted in the small house since Gentry's threats. Where before there had been mere coexistence, now there was quiet unity. Weston had taken to teaching Samuel how to track in the snow. See here, he'd say, pointing to faint impressions. Rabbit, moving fast, something spooked it. How can you tell it was scared? Distance between the prints. When they're relaxed, they hop different. Samuel absorbed every lesson with fierce attention, as if preparing for a war only he could see coming. At 9, he'd already learned that knowledge meant survival. Inside. Joanna worked on mending while Amos practiced his letters at the kitchen table. The boy's tongue poked out in concentration as he carefully formed each character. Mama, how do you spell family? Family. He worked laboriously, then held up his slate. I wrote about us. My family is Mama and Samuel, and me and Mr. Weston. That's good. Sweetheart, is Mr. Weston really family now? Joanna's needle paused. Through the window, she could see Weston and Samuel returning from their tracking lesson, both covered in snow but moving in easy synchronization. Yes, she said quietly. I suppose he is. That night after supper, Weston surprised them all by pulling out a wooden whistle he'd carved. Didn't know you played, Joanna said. Haven't in years. He turned the simple instrument in his hands. My daughter liked music. It was the most he'd ever said about his lost family. The boys grew still, sensing the weight of the moment. Then Weston raised the whistle to his lips and played. The melody was simple, something between a lullaby and a hymn. But in the warm kitchen with snow falling outside, it sounded like home. Amos climbed into his lap without asking, and Weston shifted to accommodate him without missing a note. When he finished, Samuel asked, Will you teach me? If you'd like. I would. Pa never... I'd like to learn. Weston nodded. We'll make you one tomorrow. Later, after the boys were asleep, Joanna found herself lingering over the dishes, reluctant to end the evening. Weston sat by the fire, carefully oiling his boots. Thank you, she said. For the music. The boys needed that. We all did, I think. She dried her hands slowly. Your daughter. What was her name? Margaret. Maggie. His hands stilled on the leather. She was 6. Thomas was 4. I'm sorry. Fever took them. My wife, too, 3 years ago. He resumed his work. Movements precise. Couldn't stay on that land after too many ghosts. Started drifting, working where I could. Then that business with the horses. The man who accused you, rancher named Hartley. I'd refused to break horses his way. He liked to break their spirits along with their wildness. When I quit, he made sure I'd have trouble finding work anywhere else. A bitter smile touched his lips. Guess he succeeded. Joanna sat across from him, something she'd been doing more often lately. Do you regret it? Standing up to him? No, man's got to be able to look at himself in the mirror. Even if it costs everything? Especially then. They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, wind rattled the windows, but inside felt safe, warm, complete. I have something for you, Weston said suddenly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Joanna unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a carved wooden bird, so detailed she could see individual feathers. It's beautiful. Meadowlark. Heard you humming the other day while you worked. Reminded me of their song. She turned the carving in her hands, throat tight with unexpected emotion. When had he found time to make this? When had he noticed her humming? I don't know what to say. Don't have to say anything. Just thought, you should have something nice. Something that's just yours. Their eyes met across the flickering firelight. For a moment, the air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Then Amos cried out in his sleep, breaking the spell. I should check on him, Joanna said, standing quickly. Of course, but she paused at the doorway. Weston, thank you for everything. He nodded, already turning back to his boots. But she caught his reflection in the window glass and saw him touch his pocket where he kept Amos's drawing. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Not Gentry or his men, but a woman Joanna didn't recognize, driving a rickety wagon with determined inexperience. Are you Mrs. Cross? The woman asked. She was young, pretty, despite the worn dress and worried eyes. I am. I'm Ellen Hartley. I need to speak with your husband. Joanna's stomach dropped. Hartley, the rancher who'd accused Weston. What's this about? Please, it's important. I've come a long way. Weston emerged from the barn, saw the woman, and stopped dead. His face went carefully blank. Mrs. Hartley. Weston. She climbed down from the wagon, nearly stumbling. I had to find you, to tell you, you shouldn't be here. My husband is dead. The words came out in a rush. Shot 2 weeks ago in a dispute over cards. But before he died, he confessed. About the horses. About what he did to you." The silence stretched taut as wire. Samuel and Amos had appeared, drawn by the stranger's arrival. "Boys, go inside," Joanna said quietly. For once, they obeyed without argument. "He wrote it down," Ellen Hartley continued, pulling out a paper. "Signed it. Witnessed. You weren't a horse thief. He lied because you wouldn't bow to him." Weston didn't move to take the paper. "Why bring this to me?" "Because it was wrong. What he did was wrong. I couldn't live with knowing and doing nothing." She held out the confession. "Take it. Clear your name." Finally, slowly, Weston took the document. His hands, Joanna noticed, trembled slightly. "This could have saved me 6 months ago," he said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry. I was afraid of him then." Ellen Hartley's voice broke. "I'm not afraid anymore. What will you do now?" "Go east. My sister lives in St. Louis. Start over." She looked between them. "I hope you can forgive me for staying silent." Weston folded the paper carefully. "Nothing to forgive. You did what you had to do to survive. We all do." After she left, Joanna found Weston standing in the barn, staring at the confession. "This changes everything," she said. "You're free, really free. You could go anywhere." He looked up at her. "Could I?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning, because somewhere in the last weeks, invisible threads had woven between them. Amos's laughter, Samuel's hero worship, shared suppers and evening conversations, a carved meadowlark, and a child's drawing. "The boys would miss you," she said carefully. "Just the boys?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "No, not just the boys." He stepped closer, still holding the paper that could give him back his life. "I made a promise to Amos about keeping this place. Promises to children don't count in court. They count to me." He tucked the confession into his shirt. "Besides, still got work to finish. Can't leave a job half done. Is that all we are?" "A job?" He reached out, slowly, giving her time to step back. When she didn't, his work-rough fingers brushed her cheek. "No," he said simply. "Not anymore." The kiss was tentative, a question more than a statement. She answered by leaning in, her hands finding his shoulders. He tasted of coffee and winter air, of promises and new beginnings. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily. She saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, not just kindness or determination, but warmth, hope. "Gentry won't stop," she said. "This paper doesn't change that. No, but it changes me. I'm not a convict anymore, not a man living on sufferance." He smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "I'm a free man choosing to stay." That night, as snow began to fall in earnest, Weston moved his few possessions from the lean-to to the small room off the kitchen. It wasn't the master bedroom, that would be too much, too fast, but it was inside, part of the home. As Joanna tucked Amos into bed, he asked, "Is Mr. Weston staying forever now? Would you like that?" "Yes, he makes the best toys and tells good stories and makes you smile." "Do I not smile?" "Not like now. Now you smile with your whole face." Children, she thought, saw everything. In the kitchen, she found Weston teaching Samuel to play the whistle he'd carved that day. The boy's first attempts were more squeak than music, but Weston praised each effort. "That's it. Don't force the air. Let it flow." This is family, she thought, not the one she'd planned or expected, but the one that had grown from desperate choices and daily kindness. A convicted horse thief, a desperate widow, and 2 boys who needed more than either could give alone. But together they made something whole. 28 days until Gentry's deadline. The confession in Weston's pocket wouldn't stop him, but it had changed something fundamental. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting, and more importantly, they were fighting together. As the snow continued to fall, sealing them inside their small, warm world. Joanna picked up her mending and listened to her son learn to make music. Beside her, the carved meadowlark caught the firelight. Wings spread in eternal song. The attack came at midnight, 3 weeks before the debt was due. Joanna woke to the sound of splintering wood and men's voices. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, Weston was already moving, rifle in hand. "Stay with the boys," he commanded, heading for the door. "Weston, please." He looked back at her, and in his eyes she saw not the quiet man who carved toys and played the whistle, but someone harder, someone dangerous. "Keep them safe." She gathered Samuel and Amos, both wide-eyed with fear, and barricaded themselves in the boys' room. Through the thin walls, she heard Weston's voice, calm but carrying. "That's far enough?" Well, she recognized the voice. Bart Hutchins, one of Gentry's men. The horse thief's got teeth. Not a horse thief anymore. There was steel in Weston's tone. "Got papers to prove it, which means I'm just a man protecting his home. Law's on my side. Law." Hutchins laughed. "You think that matters out here? I think you should leave. Now. Or what, you'll shoot? There's 4 of us. Cross. Then I'll need 4 bullets." The silence stretched taut. Joanna pressed the boys closer, heart hammering. Samuel struggled against her grip. "I should help him." The boy whispered fiercely. "No, he asked us to stay safe. We honor that." Outside, she heard movement, boots on frozen ground. Then Hutchins again. "This ain't over. Gentry wants this place. Gentry can want all he likes. Wanting and having are different things." More movement, the sound of horses, then blessed quiet. Joanna waited 10 minutes before emerging. The boys behind her. They found Weston on the porch, rifles still ready, watching the darkness. "They're gone," he said without turning. "For now." "The chicken coop," Samuel said, pointing. The structure was smashed. Frightened chickens scattered across the yard. Feed bags had been slashed, their contents spilling onto the frozen ground. "Why?" Amos asked. Voice small. "Why would they hurt the chickens?" "Because they could," Weston said simply. He set down the rifle and knelt before the boy. "But we'll fix it. Come morning, we'll build it better. They'll just break it again. Maybe, but we'll keep building. That's what we do." They spent the rest of the night gathering the scattered chickens, Weston standing watch while Joanna and the boys coaxed the frightened birds back to safety. By dawn, they'd recovered most of them, though 2 were found dead, necks broken. "We should bury them," Amos said solemnly. So they did, holding a small funeral that would have been absurd under other circumstances. But Joanna understood. It wasn't about the chickens. It was about maintaining dignity in the face of cruelty. As they finished, riders appeared on the horizon. Weston reached for his rifle, but Joanna touched his arm. "It's Tom." "The sheriff." Sheriff Coleman rode up with 2 deputies, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "Got a report of trouble out here," he said. "Bit late," Weston observed. "Would have been here sooner, but there was a fire in town. Gentry's freight office." Tom's expression was carefully neutral. Seemed someone was careless with a lantern. Joanna and Weston exchanged glances. A convenient distraction. "Anyone hurt?" she asked. "No, but it kept us busy most of the night." Tom dismounted, walked to the ruined chicken coop. "This Gentry's work?" "His men," Weston said. "Hutchins and 3 others. See their faces?" "Too dark," Tom sighed. "Without witnesses." "I know." Weston's voice held no anger, just tired acceptance. "Can't prove anything." "I'm sorry, Joanna." Tom looked genuinely pained. "I wish I could do more." "It's not your fault." After the sheriff left, they set about cleaning up. The work was hard, cold, and disheartening. But as the morning wore on, unexpected help arrived. First came the Millers from the neighboring ranch, bringing lumber and nails. Then the widow Patterson with her grown sons. "Heard you had trouble," Patterson said brusquely. "Can't have that. You're good neighbors." By noon, 6 families had gathered. The men rebuilt the chicken coop while the women prepared food. The children, including Samuel and Amos, carried supplies and ran messages. I didn't know we had so many friends, Joanna said to Mrs. Miller. Maybe you didn't, but folks have been watching your man work, seeing how he treats you and the boys. The older woman smiled. Good people recognize good people. Even if they started as horse thieves, he was innocent. We know that now, but even before, we could see his character. She nodded toward where Weston was showing a group of boys, including Samuel, how to properly set a corner post. Man who's patient with children and works without complaint. That's worth more than any paper saying he's innocent. By evening, not only was the chicken coop rebuilt, stronger than before, but the barn had new patches on its roof and the corral had been reinforced. The community that had whispered when she chose a convict husband now stood with them against Gentry's harassment. As the neighbors departed, each promised to keep watch, to ride over if they saw trouble. It was frontier justice, not the law of courts and papers, but of people standing together. That night, as Joanna served supper, she noticed Weston was quiet, even by his standards. What's wrong? He looked up from his barely touched plate. This escalated because of me, my presence. Maybe if I... Don't! Her voice was sharp. Don't you dare! Mama. Amos looked worried. She softened her tone. We're in this together. All of us. You don't run from bullies. You stand, even when standing costs everything. Especially then. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. You taught me that. Samuel, who'd been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke. I want to learn to shoot. Weston and Joanna exchanged glances. You're young, she began. Not too young. Other boys my age can shoot. If those men come back... His jaw set stubbornly. I need to protect our family. Our family. The words hung in the air like a declaration. All right, Weston said quietly. Tomorrow, I'll teach you. But Samuel, a gun's not for scaring or threatening. It's for protecting. Last choice, not first. Understood? Yes, sir. Later, after the boys were asleep. Joanna found Weston on the porch despite the cold, keeping watch. You should rest, she said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Can't, they'll come again. Maybe, but you can't stand guard every night for the next 3 weeks. Watch me. She sat beside him on the bench he'd built last week. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Indifferent to human struggles. What Mrs. Miller said today, about people seeing your character, she was right. I'm just doing what needs doing. No, you're doing more. She leaned against his shoulder, felt him tense, then slowly relax. You're teaching my boys to be men, good men. You're showing this community that redemption is possible. You're fighting for us when you could have taken that confession and ridden away free. Joanna, I love you. The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the cold air like visible breath. She felt him go still beside her. You don't have to say anything, she hurried on. I just needed you to know, in case something happens. He turned to her then, and in the dim light from the kitchen window, she saw his face clearly. The weathered lines, the gray eyes that had seen too much, the mouth that so rarely smiled but did so now. Just slightly. Nothing's going to happen, he said. Because I love you too. You and the boys. And I'll be damned if Travis Gentry or anyone else takes away the first real home I've had in 3 years. He kissed her then, there on the porch with her neighbor's gifts surrounding them and danger lurking in the darkness. It was a kiss that tasted of promises and determination, of second chances and last stands. When they parted, she saw movement in the kitchen window, 2 small faces quickly disappearing. The boys are watching, she said. Good. Let them see that love's worth fighting for. They sat together in the cold, keeping watch, no longer alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Gentry wouldn't give up easily, but tonight they had each other, and a community that had proven itself, and love spoken aloud under infinite stars. 3 weeks. 21 days to find $300 or lose everything. But as Weston wrapped his arm around her, as she felt the solid strength of him beside her. Joanna believed in miracles. After all, hadn't she already experienced one? A desperate choice in a mocking courthouse had brought her not just a worker, but a partner. Not just a husband in name, but a man worth loving. If that could happen, anything was possible, even saving their home. The decision came to Weston on a cold Tuesday morning, 2 weeks before the debt was due. He'd been splitting wood, each swing of the axe marking time they didn't have, when the solution presented itself with terrible clarity. He knew where money moved through the territory, knew the routes, the schedules, the guards. Information gathered not through criminal intent, but through years of honest work, moving between ranches, overhearing conversations in bunkhouses. He'd never used that knowledge before, never needed to. But watching Joanna count their meager savings for the 10th time, seeing Samuel practice with the old rifle like a soldier preparing for war, hearing Amos ask if they'd have to leave their home, that changed everything. That night, he made his preparations quietly. The family rifle, cleaned and loaded, a bandana that could cover his face, dark clothes, a saddlebag for the take. "You're going somewhere," Joanna said. It wasn't a question. She'd appeared in the barn doorway like a ghost, shawl wrapped tight against the cold. "Just checking the fence lines. Don't lie to me." Her voice was steady, but he heard the fear beneath. Not now. Not after everything. He set down the saddle he'd been adjusting. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." "The truth?" He turned to face her. "The truth is, we have 14 days and $63. The truth is, Gentry won't stop until he has this land. The truth is, I know a way to get the money." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "No. Joanna, no." She stepped closer, hands clenched. "You think I'd trade your freedom for this land? You think the boys need a father in prison? They need a home. They need you." Her voice broke. "I need you." "And in 2 weeks, when Gentry comes with the law to evict you, what then? Then we face it together, as a family." She touched his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You promised, Amos. You promised me. Don't break those promises by trying to keep them." He caught her hand, held it against his cheek. 3 years since Margaret died, and he'd forgotten how it felt to have someone see through him so completely. "I can't watch you lose everything," he said roughly. "And I can't watch you become something you're not. You're not a thief. Weston, don't let Gentry make you one." They stood there in the barn, surrounded by the tools of honest work, while his plan dissolved like snow in spring. She was right. He knew she was right. But knowing didn't make the weight any lighter. "Then what do we do?" "We find another way. We always have before." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Judge Cornelius Pike himself, riding up in his black buggy like a carrion bird descending. "Judge," Weston greeted him coldly from the porch. "Cross." Pike's thin face showed distaste. "I've come to speak with Mrs. Cross, alone." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my husband," Joanna said, emerging from the house. Pike's smile was sharp as glass. "Very well. I've come with a proposition. From Mr. Gentry." "We're not interested. You haven't heard it yet." Pike produced a document. "Mr. Gentry is willing to extend your loan. 6 months, no additional interest. Very generous terms." Weston took the paper, read it carefully. His jaw tightened. "In exchange for what?" "Why, for you leaving, of course." Pike's satisfaction was evident. "Mr. Gentry feels your presence here is disruptive. Bad for the community. A convicted criminal, even one claiming innocence. He has proof of innocence." Joanna interjected. "Papers can be forged. Witnesses can lie." Pike waved dismissively. "The point is, Mr. Gentry wants you gone. Cross. Leave the territory, and your wife keeps her land." "My husband stays," Joanna said firmly. "Then you lose everything in 13 days. Pike climbed back into his buggy. "Think carefully. Mrs. Cross, Your stubbornness affects more than just you. Those boys deserve better than homeless poverty." After he left, Weston stood rigid on the porch, hands clenched. "Don't even consider it." Joanna said, "He's right about the boys. He's right about nothing. We don't bargain with snakes." That afternoon, while Joanna and the boys were at the miller's returning borrowed tools, Weston made a different kind of preparation. He wrote 2 letters, one to Joanna, one to the boys. He placed them in the drawer where she kept her few precious things. If something happened, she'd find them. Then he saddled his horse and rode to town. The Imperial Saloon was exactly as he remembered. Too much smoke, too much noise, too many men with too little purpose. He found who he was looking for at a corner table. Jake Morrison looked up from his cards, surprise flickering across his scarred face. "Weston Cross, heard you got yourself married." "I did. And now you're here." Morrison's smile was knowing. "Must be serious." Weston sat down, ignoring the curious looks from other patrons. "That job you mentioned last year, the one heading through Devil's Canyon, is it still running?" "Every month like clockwork. Why?" "I need $300 in 12 days. Morrison whistled low. "That's a specific number." "It is. This about Gentry? Heard he's squeezing your woman." "My wife, and yes." Morrison leaned back, studying him. They'd worked together years ago, before Weston had tried to go straight. Before families and false accusations and desperate choices. "It's dangerous. 2 guards now, both armed, and the canyon's narrow. No room for error." "I remember. You sure about this? Last time you said you were done with this life." I am." Weston met his gaze steadily. "But I need that money." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, 4 days from now, moon'll be dark. Meet at Widow's Rock at midnight if you're serious." Weston stood to leave, but Morrison caught his arm. "Cross, once you do this, there's no going back. You know that, right?" "I know." He rode home slowly, the weight of his decision settling over him like a shroud. But what choice did he have? Let Joanna and the boys lose everything? Watch Gentry win? When he arrived, he found chaos. Joanna was treating a gash on Samuel's forehead while Amos cried in the corner. "What happened?" "Boys in town," Samuel said, trying not to wince as his mother worked. "Called us names. Said we were trash, living with a horse thief." "So you fought them?" He defended his family's honor. Joanna said quietly, "Both of them did." Weston knelt before Amos, who had a bruised cheek. "You all right, partner?" Amos nodded, sniffling. "I hit him back, like you taught me." "Good man." He looked at Samuel. "Both of you, standing up for what's right." "Even when it costs?" Samuel asked, echoing their earlier conversation. "Especially then." That night, Weston couldn't sleep. He stood at the window, watching the stars, when small footsteps approached. "Mr. Weston?" Amos stood in his nightshirt, dragging his blanket. "I can't sleep. Bad dreams?" The boy nodded. Weston lifted him up, settled into the rocking chair Joanna used for mending. "Want to tell me about it?" "The bad men came and took our house. You tried to stop them, but they put you back in chains." Amos's voice was very small. "I don't want you to go back to jail." "I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" That word again. Promise. Such a small word to carry such weight. "I promise I'll do everything I can to keep us together," he said carefully. "Mama says you're the best man she knows," Amos said sleepily. "Better than my first PA. He was sick lots." "Your first PA loved you. Being sick wasn't his fault." "I know. But you're not sick. You're strong. You can protect us." The trust in those words was a knife between his ribs. In 4 days, he planned to break that trust, become the criminal everyone had accused him of being. "Go to sleep, little man," he whispered. "Will you stay until I do?" "I'll stay." He rocked slowly, feeling the child's weight against his chest, remembering other children, other nights, other promises he'd failed to keep. Outside, a coyote called, and its mate answered. Even predators had families. When Joanna found them an hour later, both asleep in the chair, she covered them with a quilt and watched for a moment. her husband and her son, 2 pieces of her heart. "We'll find a way," she whispered to the darkness. "We have to." But time was running out, and miracles were in short supply. In 4 days, Weston would have to choose between the man he wanted to be and the man his family needed him to be. The letter in the drawer waited, unread. His promise to Amos echoed in the darkness, and somewhere in the night, Travis Gentry slept soundly, confident in his coming victory. 12 days. The countdown continued, relentless as a judge's gavel. Spring came early that year, melting the snow from the mountains and filling the creek with rushing water. The ranch, saved by sacrifice and stubbornness, began to bloom with new life. The irrigation ditches Weston had planned were finally dug, channeling precious water to the lower pasture where green shoots pushed through dark earth. Joanna stood at the kitchen window, watching her husband and sons work the field. 3 months had passed since that terrible night at Devil's Canyon. Since Weston had made his choice, the money he'd brought back, exactly $300, had saved their home. But the cost still showed in his eyes sometimes, in quiet moments when he thought no one was looking. "Mama, look!" Amos burst through the door, muddy from head to toe, carrying a tiny yellow chick. "The eggs hatched." "So I see. And you've brought half the henhouse floor with you?" "Sorry." But his grin was unrepentant. "Can I show Mr. Weston? After you wash. And it's Pa, remember? We agreed." It had been Samuel's idea. 2 weeks after the debt was paid. "He is our PA now," the boy had said firmly. "He earned it." Amos scampered off to wash, and Joanna returned to her bread making. Through the window, she saw a rider approaching, her hands stilled on the dough. Even now, unexpected visitors made her heart race. But it was only Mrs. Miller, bringing news from town. "Thought you should know," the older woman said, accepting a cup of coffee. "That trouble in Missouri finally caught up with Travis Gentry." Joanna's hands tightened on her cup. "What kind of trouble?" "Seems he's been running the same scheme there, lending money to desperate folks, then taking their land, only in Missouri. He tried it on the wrong family. They had connections." Mrs. Miller's satisfaction was evident. "He's been arrested. All his holdings are being investigated, including our loan. Already cleared. Sheriff Coleman made sure of it. You're free and clear. Joanna." After Mrs. Miller left, Joanna sat quietly, absorbing the news. Free and clear. No more looking over their shoulders. No more wondering when Gentry would return. She found Weston in the barn, mending harnesses. He looked up when she entered, that small smile that was just for her lighting his weathered face. "Good news?" he asked, reading her expression. She told him about Gentry. Watched the tension leave his shoulders. Saw him breathe deeply for what seemed like the first time in months. "It's over," she said. "Really over." He set down the harness, pulled her into his arms. "No, it's just beginning." That evening, as they sat down to supper, a knock came at the door. Weston answered it, hand instinctively moving to where his rifle rested. Old habits. A woman stood on their porch, travel-worn and nervous. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair and kind eyes that held old sadness. "I'm looking for Joanna Bell," she said. "Joanna Mason, that was." Joanna rose slowly. "That's me, though it's crossed now." "I know. The woman swallowed hard. "I'm your father's sister, your Aunt Catherine, from Missouri." The silence stretched. Joanna hadn't seen her father's family in over a decade, not since the falling out that had driven her west with Frank. "May I come in?" Catherine asked. They sat awkwardly around the kitchen table. The boys, sensing adult business, had been sent to do evening chores. "Your father is dying," Catherine said without preamble. "He wants to see you, to make amends." "He had 20 years to make amends," Joanna said stiffly. "I know, but people change." "Joanna, especially when facing the end." Catherine pulled out an envelope. "He asked me to give you this." Joanna opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a bank draft for $2,000 and a letter in her father's shaking script. "My dear daughter," she read aloud. "I was wrong. About Frank. About your choices, about everything. I let pride cost me my only child. Don't let my mistakes become yours. Come home, if only to say goodbye. Let me meet my grandsons. Let me try to earn your forgiveness." "He's sincere," Catherine said softly. "He talks about you constantly, about the letters you sent early on, before he returned them unopened. He kept everyone." Joanna looked at Weston, saw understanding in his gray eyes. He knew about difficult fathers, about pride and pain and the possibility of redemption. "We'll come," she said. The journey to Missouri took 2 weeks by stage and rail. The boys were excited by their first train ride, pressing their faces to the windows to watch the landscape rush by. Weston sat quietly, still uncomfortable in crowds, but steady as always. They arrived to find Joanna's childhood home much as she remembered, a large white house with black shutters, surrounded by elm trees. Her father lay in the same bed where her mother had died 15 years earlier. He was smaller than her memory, shrunken by illness and regret, but his eyes, when they found her, filled with tears. "Joanna, my girl." "Hello, Father." The reconciliation wasn't easy. 20 years of hurt couldn't be erased in days, but slowly, carefully, they built bridges. Her father delighted in Samuel and Amos, telling them stories of their mother's childhood. He and Weston spoke at length about ranching, about weather patterns and water rights, finding common ground in the land. "You chose well," her father told her one evening. "Better than I gave you credit for." "I chose twice," she said. "Once poorly, once perfectly. We all deserve second chances." He squeezed her hand weakly. "I'm glad mine came in time." He died peacefully a week later, holding her hand, surrounded by family he'd almost lost forever. The will was read the next day. He'd left everything to Joanna. The house, the investments, enough money to ensure her sons could attend college if they wished, enough to build the ranch into something grand. "We could stay," Catherine suggested. "This is your heritage." But Joanna looked at her husband, saw the answer in his eyes. This place held too many ghosts for both of them. "No," she said. "Our home is in Colorado. Our life is there." They returned to find spring in full bloom. The ranch had been well tended by the Millers. The new calves were healthy. The garden Catherine had helped plant was thriving. That evening, as they unpacked, Weston pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Joanna asked. "Something I've been working on." She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a wooden sign, beautifully carved. "Cross Family Ranch, established 1873. "Thought it was time we made it official," he said. "It's perfect." She traced the letters. "All of it. Our life, our family, our home." Later, after the boys were asleep, they sat on the porch watching the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their awkward beginning, their struggles, their victories. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "That day in the courthouse? Choosing this life?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I regret things I had to do to save it. But choosing you, choosing this family, never. Even though I picked you from a lineup of convicts? Especially because of that." He pulled her close. "You saw something in me I'd forgotten existed, gave me purpose when I had none, gave me a family when I thought I'd never have one again." "We gave each other that," she corrected. In the distance, a coyote called, but it no longer sounded lonely. It sounded like home. The next morning, Weston and Samuel hung the new sign while Joanna and Amos planted flowers beneath it. Neighbors rode by and waved, accepting the Cross family ranch as naturally as sunrise. Sheriff Coleman stopped by that afternoon with final paperwork clearing any claims against their land. "Thought you'd want this in writing," he said, "just in case." As he left, he paused. "You know, Joanna, when you picked Weston that day, I thought you'd lost your mind. And now I think you might be the smartest woman in the territory." That night at supper, Amos announced, "I'm going to write a story for school, about our family." "What kind of story?" Samuel asked. "About how Mama picked Pa from the jail and how he saved our ranch and how we're a real family now. That's quite a story. Weston said, "Make sure you spell family right." "Family," Amos recited proudly. "I know it by heart." As darkness fell over the Cross family ranch, as the carved sign caught the last rays of sunset, as four people who'd found each other through desperate choices settled in for another evening together, the words seemed to echo through the house. Family. Not the one any of them had planned, but the one they'd fought for, bled for, chosen over and over again. A widow who'd refused to give up. A man who'd reclaimed his honor. Two boys who'd found a father. Together, they'd turned a mockery of justice into a love story. Together, they'd built something worth saving. And together, they faced whatever came next, knowing that some chains, once broken, forged the strongest bonds of all.